In 1968, the Beatles returned from India with almost 30 new songs, far more than any album could handle. Studios scrambled, 4-track tapes were pushed to the limit. Then a rogue 8-track machine slipped in, dividing engineers and sparking chaos behind the scenes. This is the story of how too much creativity and a single technical gamble nearly tore apart the band that made it. What happened inside Abbey Road, and why did the studio's new technology push everything to breaking point? At the end of May 1968, a quiet bungalow in Esher became the unlikely headquarters for a creative explosion. George Harrison's home filled with the sound of acoustic guitars, laughter, and the scratch of pencils on lyric sheets. Over 2 days, John, Paul, and George gathered around a 4-track Ampex tape recorder, capturing the raw beginnings of what would become the White Album. Ringo was away, but the trio pressed on, laying down 27 demos, each song a rough outline stripped of studio polish, yet brimming with possibility. Some tracks, like Back in the USSR and Dear Prudence, were nearly complete sketches. Others, such as Child of Nature, would morph into something entirely different before reaching the public. The tapes reveal Lennon's voice weaving through new melodies, McCartney's knack for structure, and Harrison's growing confidence as a songwriter. These sessions at Kinfauns were not just casual rehearsals. They were a stockpile, an acoustic blueprint for the months ahead. Each demo served as a seed, destined to sprout layers of sound, overdubs, and experimentation once the band entered Abbey Road. The sheer number of songs, more than any previous Beatles album, meant the usual studio routine would not be enough. Engineers would soon face a flood of material, with each Beatle eager to push their own ideas. The Esher tapes, once passed around as bootlegs, now stand as proof of a band overflowing with invention, ready to test the limits of what an album could hold. Abbey Road in June 1968 was a battleground of old and new technology. The Beatles arrived with a flood of songs, but the studio's 4-track tape machines were already feeling outmatched. Across London, Trident Studios had quietly upgraded to 8-track recording, letting artists layer sound in ways Abbey Road simply could not. For Paul and John, the lure of Trident's flexibility was too strong. They booked sessions for tracks like Hey Jude and Dear Prudence, chasing fuller arrangements and denser textures. But every trip to Trident meant tapes had to be transferred back and forth, introducing subtle losses and headaches for the engineers. Inside Abbey Road, the frustration was growing. EMI's new transistorized mixing consoles sounded sterile compared to the warm, familiar tone of the older Valve desks. Engineers like Ken Scott and Dave Harris, under pressure from the band, took matters into their own hands. Without management's approval, they installed Abbey Road's long-delayed 8-track machine in Studio 2. The first recordings with the new setup felt off, prompting a round of checks and recalibration. Still, the sound was different, cleaner, but colder. For the Beatles, it was both a blessing and a challenge. More tracks meant more possibilities, but also more isolation. Overdubs piled up as each member worked alone, building songs piece by piece instead of together in the room. For chief engineer Geoff Emerick, the atmosphere became unbearable. He had weathered the chaos of Sgt. Pepper, but the endless arguments and technical demands of the White Album sessions wore him down. By mid-July, Emerick walked out, leaving Chris Thomas and Ken Scott to pick up the pieces. The studio itself seemed split, old routines falling away, new technology pushing the band further apart. Every decision about tape and console shaped the album's sound, and the cracks in the process were beginning to show. Ringo Starr stepped away from Abbey Road on August 22, 1968. He'd had enough, fed up with the endless takes, the bickering, and a sense that his drumming was no longer wanted. The studio log that night simply notes his absence, but the impact was immediate. With Ringo gone, Paul McCartney sat behind the drum kit for Back in the USSR and Dear Prudence. The rhythm on both tracks carries a different energy, snappier, more aggressive, almost impatient. Paul layered the drum parts himself, sometimes recording multiple takes to get the right feel, while John Lennon and George Harrison filled in on bass and guitar. The result is a tight, almost claustrophobic groove that still manages to swing. Ringo's absence lasted nearly 2 weeks, with session logs showing him missing until September the 5th, 1968. During that time, the band functioned as a trio, each member stepping into roles left vacant by the others. The air in the studio turned brittle, and conversations grew shorter, tempers flared over small details. Yet out of this tension, the band found a new way to work. They traded instruments, built tracks piece by piece, and sometimes did not even see each other for entire sessions. The break forced creative problem solving. Paul's drumming on Dear Prudence gave the song its hypnotic pulse, while Back in the USSR became a pastiche of American rock, driven by his restless energy. When Ringo finally returned, he found his drum kit covered in flowers, a silent apology from the others, and a reminder of how much had changed in just a few days. George Harrison wanted something different for his new song. On September the 6th, 1968, he called Eric Clapton and invited him to Abbey Road. Clapton hesitated. No outsider had ever played lead guitar on a Beatles track. But Harrison insisted he needed a friend in the room. The session logs show the band working through multiple takes of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, searching for the right sound. Clapton's guitar, run through an automatic double tracking effect, brought a biting edge that lifted the song out of its uncertainty. Harrison later said Clapton's presence changed the mood, breaking the tension that had settled over the group. Elsewhere, the band pushed even further into uncharted territory. John Lennon, with Yoko Ono at his side, pieced together Revolution 9 from a mountain of tape loops and sound effects. Studio notes list football chants, spoken word snippets, alarms, and orchestral fragments, all spliced into an 8-minute sound collage. Lennon and Ono spent hours hunched over tape machines, rewinding, layering, and manipulating sounds until the track became a swirling, disorienting audio landscape. The finished piece divided fans and critics, but for Lennon, it was a statement. Pop music could be as radical as any avant-garde art. The appetite for risk did not stop there. Paul McCartney chased the loudest, rawest rock track the band had ever attempted. Helter Skelter ran through 18-minute takes, guitars screaming, voices hoarse, the studio air thick with heat and exhaustion. Myths later grew around the song, but in 1968, it was simply the Beatles trying to outdo themselves. Not every experiment made the cut. Harrison's Not Guilty took 102 takes before being shelved. These marathon sessions and sonic gambles left their mark. Each risk echoed through the grooves of the finished album. Richard Hamilton's design arrived as a quiet provocation. Gone was the riot of color and collage from Sgt. Pepper's sleeve. In its place stood a stark white canvas, the words "The Beatles" barely visible, pressed into the surface with subtle embossing. Each copy bore its own unique serial number, stamped in black in the lower corner, as if the album were a limited art edition rather than a mass-market release. Hamilton, a leading figure in British pop art, worked closely with Paul McCartney, trading sketches and ideas in letters and meetings. Early concepts like a coffee cup stain or apple pulp pressed into the cover were discarded for being too playful or impractical. What remained was deliberate blankness, a sleeve stripped of distraction, inviting listeners to focus on the music inside. The numbering, at Hamilton's suggestion, made even millions of albums feel personal, each one a singular object in a sea of white. 30 songs, each with its own identity, crowded the White Album's master tape. The sheer volume of material forced a choice that few bands could have made at the time. EMI, wary of the costs and skeptical about audience appetite, pushed for a single LP. Producer George Martin argued for focus, urging the group to trim the set to its strongest tracks, but the band refused to compromise. John, Paul, George and Ringo stood together on one thing: every song deserved its place. The decision meant higher production costs and a retail price nearly double that of a standard album. Manufacturing required special packaging, and the label braced for complaints. Still, the Beatles insisted on a double album, 4 sides to capture the full sweep of their ideas. When EMI finally agreed, it was clear the band's creative momentum mattered more than commercial caution. The White Album would be as sprawling and unpredictable as the sessions that birthed it. Half a century later, artists and producers still debate whether creative chaos divides or defines. As streaming fragments music into singles and playlists, the White Album's sprawling ambition feels more relevant than ever. Innovation rarely looks tidy. Sometimes it is a beautiful mess. Let me know your take in the comments.